They called her Barbie during basic training, thinking her delicate features and perfect bone structure made her soft. What they didn't know was that behind those emerald eyes lay the calculating mind of someone who would become the most lethal. Operative, the 75th Ranger Regiment had ever produced, preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Riverside Community College as Dr. Sarah Chen locked her Honda Civic and walked toward the mathematics building. Her heels clicked against the asphalt with the measured pace of someone who had learned to move through the world without drawing unnecessary attention. Students passed her on the walkways, some stealing glances at the woman who looked more like she belonged in a boardroom or on a red carpet than teaching calculus to 18-year-olds. At 32, Sarah possessed the kind of natural beauty that made people assume things about her intelligence, her background, her capabilities. Shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light just right, a face that belonged in magazines, and a figure that designer clothes seemed tailored for. She dressed conservatively now, in muted colors and professional cuts that downplayed rather than emphasized. But even her attempts at invisibility couldn't completely mask what genetics had given her. The faculty lounge was already buzzing with the usual morning conversation when Sarah entered. Professor Martinez was holding court near the coffee machine, regaling his audience with another story about his weekend rock climbing adventures. Dr. Patel was grading papers at the corner table, red pen moving with surgical precision across student essays. The usual suspects engaged in the usual academic theater. "Morning, Sarah," called out Dr. Kimberly Walsh, the department head, looking up from her laptop. "Ready for another thrilling day of explaining derivatives to kids who think math is a foreign language?" Sarah smiled and poured herself coffee from the pot that had been brewing since before dawn. "Living the dream, Kim. Though I have to say, yesterday's calculus section actually seemed engaged. Might be a record." The comfortable banter continued around her, the safe conversation of people who shared nothing more dangerous than tenure-track politics and parking space disputes. Sarah participated with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to blend into whatever environment required it. She laughed at the right moments, nodded sympathetically during complaints about administrative bureaucracy, and maintained the careful facade of someone whose biggest concern was whether the copier in the math department would survive another semester. But beneath the surface, Sarah Chen was conducting the same threat assessment she'd been performing automatically for the past 4 years. Exit routes from the faculty lounge identified and memorized. Potential weapons cataloged and evaluated. The positioning of everyone in the room noted and tracked. Old habits from a life that officially no longer existed, carried forward into a world where the most dangerous thing she faced was a student challenging a grade. Her office was on the 3rd floor. A small space she'd made, comfortable with plants that somehow thrived despite the fluorescent lighting and framed photos that told a carefully curated story of her life. Pictures of her at various academic conferences, receiving her PhD in mathematics. From Stanford, hiking in national parks that looked peaceful and innocent. What the photos didn't show were the 4 years between her undergraduate degree and graduate school, when Sarah Chen had disappeared from academic records and emerged as something else entirely. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of teaching differential equations to juniors who struggled with the concept that mathematics could describe the real world. Calculus fundamentals to freshmen who still thought numbers were just abstract symbols rather than the language that governed everything. From ballistic trajectories to satellite orbits, Sarah moved through her classes with the patient competence of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching, who found satisfaction in watching understanding dawn in young minds. It was during her lunch break, grading papers in her office while eating a sandwich from the campus cafeteria, that her secure phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. The device looked identical to any other smartphone, but it was encrypted with military-grade security and connected to a network that officially didn't exist. Sarah had been carrying it for 4 years, checking it religiously despite the fact that it had never once received a message. Until today. The text was short, coded in language that would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't been trained to understand. It wildfire protocol active, asset retrieval required. Phoenix requests immediate consultation. Verification code, Tango 77 Echo. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, her hand trembling slightly as muscle memory from another life stirred to consciousness. Phoenix. She hadn't heard that call sign in 4 years. Not since the day she'd been medically retired from active duty and told that her services were no longer required. The day she'd been given a new identity, a new life, and strict instructions to never look back. The verification code was authentic. She'd memorized dozens of them during her years of active service, each one corresponding to different levels of operational security and urgency. Tango 77 Echo meant immediate response required, no questions asked. Assets in mortal danger. Sarah deleted the message and activated the phone's encryption protocol, a process that would make the device completely untraceable for the next 72 hours. Then she walked to her window and looked out at the campus quad, where students were studying under trees that had been planted long before any of them were born, living lives of blessed normalcy that they would never fully appreciate, she thought. About the 4 years she'd spent building this life. The careful construction of Sarah Chen, mathematics professor, unremarkable in every way except for a beauty that made people underestimate her intelligence. The academic credentials that were completely real, earned through night classes and summer sessions during the brief periods when her unit wasn't deployed. The friendship she'd cultivated with colleagues who knew nothing about her past and would never be able to imagine her in any other context. Most of all, she thought about the promise she'd made to herself when she'd accepted medical retirement. Never again. No more missions that required her to become someone else entirely. No more operations that existed in the shadows between what was officially acknowledged and what was actually necessary. No more nights lying awake wondering if the person she'd killed that day had family who would never know what happened to them. But Phoenix was calling. And Phoenix had never asked for help unless American lives hung in the balance. Sarah closed her office door and activated the privacy features she'd installed when she'd first taken the position. Soundproofing that looked like normal acoustic tiles, signal blocking technology disguised as computer equipment, security measures that were completely invisible but absolutely comprehensive. Then she made a phone call on a number she'd memorized but never used. The voice that answered was exactly as she remembered. Colonel Marcus Rivera, her former commanding officer, the man who'd recruited her for the unit that officially didn't exist and trained her to do things that officially never happened. "I was wondering when you'd call," Rivera said without preamble. "Took longer than I expected." "Phoenix is compromised," Sarah said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "What's the situation?" "Bad. Asset extraction went sideways in Yemen. 3 operators missing, presumed captured. Standard rescue protocols unavailable due to political considerations. We need someone with your particular skill set to go in quietly and bring them home." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with mission briefings, the automatic shift from civilian mindset to operational thinking. How long have they been missing? 18 hours, maybe less. Intelligence suggests they're being held at a compound approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Sana'a, remote location. Minimal security, but the window for extraction is closing fast. "Why me, Marcus? You've got dozens of operators who are active, current, and don't require explanations about why they've been off the grid for 4 years. Rivera was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could hear the weight of command authority in his silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of certainty that came from years of making decisions that got people killed or brought them home alive. Because this isn't a mission for active operators. This requires someone who can get close without raising suspicions, someone who can blend into civilian populations and move through hostile territory without triggering defensive responses. Someone who looks completely harmless until the moment they decide not to be. Sarah understood. She'd built a career on being underestimated, on using other people's assumptions about beauty and femininity as weapons more effective than any rifle or explosive device. Men who looked at her and saw nothing more threatening than an attractive woman invariably discovered their mistake too late to matter. I'm retired, Marcus. Medically retired. That means something. I know, and if there was any other option, I wouldn't be making this call. But Sarah, these are good people. Operators who've saved American lives in places where regular military couldn't operate. They deserve someone who'll do whatever it takes to bring them home. The weight of old loyalties pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like physical force. 4 years of peaceful normalcy, of teaching mathematics to students who would never need to calculate bullet drop or explosive blast radius. 4 years of sleeping through the night without wondering if she'd wake up to find enemies at her door. 4 years of being exactly what she appeared to be rather than something else entirely. But Phoenix was calling. And some promises transcended the comfortable boundaries of retirement and civilian life. Tell me about Phoenix, Sarah said, settling into her desk chair and activating the additional security protocols she'd hoped never to use again. Through her office window, she could see students walking to afternoon classes. Their biggest concern centered around upcoming exams and weekend plans. Rivera's sigh carried the weight of operational failures and impossible choices. Captain Jessica Torres, Staff Sergeant Michael Kim, and Sergeant First Class David Okafor. They were conducting reconnaissance on a suspected weapons trafficking operation when their extraction went dark. Last communication was a burst transmission indicating they were under heavy fire and requesting immediate evac. Sarah knew those names. Torres had been 2 classes behind her in the Advanced Operations course, a sniper whose precision had saved their unit during a particularly difficult extraction in Somalia. Kim was a communications specialist whose ability to intercept and decode enemy transmissions had prevented dozens of ambushes. Okafor was explosive ordnance disposal, the kind of person you wanted watching your back when every step might trigger a device designed to turn human beings into scattered pieces. What happened to the extraction team? Weather. Sandstorm moved in faster than meteorology predicted, grounded all air assets for 8 hours. By the time conditions cleared, the compound was crawling with hostiles and our people were gone. Satellite imagery shows they were moved to a different location, somewhere we can't reach with conventional assets. Sarah pulled up a mental map of Yemen, calculating distances and terrain challenges from memory. The region Rivera described was mountainous, remote, controlled by tribal groups whose loyalties shifted based on payment rather than politics. Exactly the kind of place where 3 American operators could disappear without a trace if someone didn't act quickly. Intelligence assessment. Limited. The compound appears to be a processing facility for captured personnel before they're moved to more permanent locations. We estimate 48 to 72 hours before they're transferred again, probably to somewhere we'll never find them. The timeline sent a chill through Sarah's chest. 72 hours was the operational window for successful hostage retrieval. After that, statistical probability of successful recovery dropped to near zero. Not because the hostages were necessarily dead, but because they disappeared into a network of safe houses and hidden facilities that intelligence agencies spent years trying to penetrate. Why can't regular special operations handle this? Rivera's pause told Sarah everything she needed to know before he spoke. Political considerations. The compound is located in territory controlled by groups that are technically allied with current diplomatic initiatives. Any official military action could destabilize negotiations that have taken months to establish. We need someone who can get in and out without leaving fingerprints that trace back to American military operations. Plausible deniability. Sarah understood the concept intimately from her years of active service. Missions that required American capabilities but couldn't afford American attribution. Operations that needed to happen but couldn't officially exist. The kind of work that fell to people who were willing to operate without support, without backup, and without the comfort of knowing their government would acknowledge their sacrifice if things went wrong. What makes you think I can succeed where official assets can't? Because you've done it before. Syria, 2019. You infiltrated a compound holding 2 journalists, neutralized 8 hostiles, and extracted both targets without anyone realizing. Americans had been involved until you were already out of the country. Sarah remembered that mission. 46 hours of careful infiltration, moving through hostile territory by convincing everyone she encountered that she was a relief worker documenting refugee conditions. The guards at the compound had seen nothing more threatening than a beautiful woman with a camera and genuine concern for human suffering. By the time they realized their mistake, she was already 3 miles away with both journalists safely extracted. That was 3 years ago, Marcus. I'm not the same person I was then, aren't you? Rivera's voice carried the kind of quiet challenge that had made him an effective commander. Because from where I'm sitting, you sound exactly like someone who's been preparing for a call like this for 4 years. Someone who's maintained security protocols and carried encrypted communications devices despite being officially retired. Someone who's kept herself in fighting condition despite having no official reason to do so. Sarah looked down at her hands, noting the calluses that came from regular firearms practice at a range 30 miles from campus. The muscle definition that resulted from pre-dawn workouts designed to maintain the physical capabilities she'd developed during active service. The reflexes she maintained through martial arts training, disguised as stress relief and personal fitness. Rivera was right. Despite her best efforts to build a normal life, she'd never really stopped being the person who could infiltrate hostile territories and extract captured personnel. She'd just hidden that person behind academic credentials and faculty meetings. The risk assessment is completely unacceptable, Sarah said, making one final attempt to find a rational reason to refuse. Single operator, no backup, no official support. If I'm captured or killed, there's no rescue coming. I know. But Sarah, if we don't act within the next 48 hours, Torres, Kim, and Okafor are going to disappear forever. They'll spend the rest of their lives in cells that don't officially exist, being interrogated by people who have no intention of following any international protocols about prisoner treatment. The image hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd seen the intelligence reports about what happened to captured American personnel in that part of the world. The systematic psychological torture designed to break down resistance and extract operational intelligence. The months or years of isolation that destroyed minds and spirits even when bodies survived. They have families, don't they? Torres has 2 kids, 8 and 10 years old. Her husband's a teacher in Colorado. Thinks she's deployed to a training facility in Georgia. Kim's parents immigrated from South Korea, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they never had. Okafor has a daughter starting college in the fall, wants to be a doctor. Each detail struck Sarah like a calculated blow, reminding her that behind every operational call sign was a human being with connections and dreams, and people who loved them. People who deserved to see their family members come home alive, rather than receiving notification that their loved ones had died in accidents that couldn't be explained, or operations that couldn't be acknowledged. What's the proposed insertion? Method? Relief worker cover. There's a legitimate humanitarian organization operating in the region, providing medical supplies and food distribution. We can get you inserted as a documentation specialist, someone taking photographs and conducting interviews for donor reports. Sarah felt the familiar shift in her thinking, the automatic transition from civilian perspective to operational planning. Cover stories she could maintain, equipment she would need, contingency plans for various failure scenarios. Her mind was already cataloging the capabilities she'd maintained during 4 years of retirement, calculating what additional training she might need to refresh skills that had been dormant, but not forgotten. Timeline for deployment? Wheels. Up in 18 hours. Equipment and briefing materials are already being prepared. Sarah, I need an answer now. Every minute we wait reduces the probability of successful extraction. Through her office window, Sarah watched a group of students studying under trees that had provided shade for generations of young people, pursuing normal dreams of normal careers. In 6 hours, she was scheduled to teach advanced calculus to juniors who would graduate and become engineers, accountants, teachers, people who would contribute to society in ways that built rather than destroyed, who would never need to know that their safety depended on others willing to operate in shadows. But somewhere in Yemen, 3 American operators were counting down the hours until they disappeared forever into a system designed to break them slowly and thoroughly. 3 people who had accepted the same risks she'd once accepted, who had made the same promises she'd once made, who deserved the same loyalty she'd once been given when she needed extraction from impossible situations. If I do this, it's the last time, Sarah said quietly. After this operation, Phoenix loses my number permanently. Understood. One last mission, then you go back to your normal life and stay there. Sarah looked at the stack of papers on her desk, exams that needed grading, lesson plans for next week's classes, the comfortable routine of academic life that had provided 4 years of peaceful normalcy. Then she thought about Jessica Torres' 2 children waiting for their mother to come home from a deployment they didn't understand, and the choice became inevitable. Send me the briefing materials, she said. I'm in. The briefing materials arrived through channels that didn't officially exist, delivered to a drop location that Sarah accessed during what appeared to be a routine grocery shopping trip. The package was disguised as promotional materials for a continuing education conference, the kind of academic literature that would raise no questions if discovered in her possession. Back in her apartment, Sarah spread the intelligence reports across her dining table, studying satellite imagery and tactical assessments with the focused intensity she'd learned during her operational years. The compound holding Torres, Kim, and Okafor was located in mountainous terrain 37 kilometers northeast of Sana'a, accessible only by dirt roads that wound through valleys controlled by tribal militias whose allegiances shifted based on payment and political convenience. The facility itself appeared to be a converted agricultural complex, surrounded by high walls and guard positions that suggested professional security rather than amateur enthusiasm. Intelligence estimates indicated 15 to 20 hostiles on site, armed with automatic weapons and equipped with communications gear that allowed coordination with other facilities in the network. Sarah's secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Rivera. Package received. Reviewing now. The intelligence is thin. Best we can do given the circumstances. Your insertion is scheduled for tomorrow evening. Relief convoy departing from Djibouti. Arrival in target area approximately 36 hours. From now, Sarah studied the proposed route, noting the checkpoint locations and known hostile positions along the way. Who else knows about this operation? Need to know basis. Myself, Deputy Director Hawkins from the agency, and the convoy coordinator. That's it. What about the relief organization? They're going to notice an additional person joining their operation. Dr. Amanda Foster runs the medical component of the relief mission. She's been briefed that you're a documentation specialist with advanced security clearance. Foster thinks you're conducting assessment for future humanitarian operations in The region. Sarah nodded, understanding the cover story. Dr. Foster would see exactly what she expected to see. Another government employee documenting humanitarian conditions for bureaucratic reports. The kind of person who blended into relief operations without raising questions or attracting attention from hostile forces. Equipment package? Standard documentation kit, plus additional medical supplies that justify extended time in remote areas. Your personal equipment has been integrated into medical supply containers. Everything you need for infiltration and extraction, packaged to avoid detection during routine inspections. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to the college, citing a sudden family emergency that required immediate travel. Her department secretary expressed appropriate concern and assured her that her classes would be covered by substitute instructors. Sarah felt a pang of guilt at lying to people who genuinely cared about her well-being. But operational security required maintaining her cover story regardless of personal discomfort. Her flight to Djibouti departed from Dallas, with connections through Amsterdam and Cairo that would make her travel patterns difficult to trace. Sarah traveled light, carrying only the personal belongings that supported her cover as a humanitarian documentation specialist. Her operational equipment would be provided in-country through channels that existed specifically for missions that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The flight gave her time to study the cultural and political background of her target area. Reviewing intelligence reports about tribal dynamics and recent developments in the ongoing civil conflict. Yemen had become a patchwork of competing authorities, with different groups controlling different territories based on military capability rather than legal jurisdiction. The kind of environment where 3 American operators could disappear without triggering diplomatic consequences. Landing in Djibouti felt like stepping back into a world she'd left behind 4 years ago. The heat was immediate and oppressive, carrying scents of diesel fuel and desert dust that brought back memories of previous deployments. The airport buzzed with the controlled chaos of military logistics, civilian relief operations, and commercial activity that characterized strategic transportation hubs in unstable regions. Sarah's contact was waiting in the civilian terminal, holding a sign with the name of the relief organization and scanning arriving passengers with professional attention. Dr. Amanda Foster appeared to be in her early 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working in difficult conditions. She approached Sarah with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex logistics under time pressure. Ms. Chen? Amanda Foster, Medical Coordinator for Hope International Relief. Welcome to Djibouti. Thank you for accommodating my last-minute addition to your team, Sarah replied, shaking hands and noting Foster's firm grip and direct eye contact. I understand this is somewhat irregular. Not at all. Documentation specialists are crucial for maintaining donor support and government cooperation. Though I have to say, you don't look like most of the documentation people we work with. Sarah felt the familiar assessment being made, the automatic assumptions that came with her appearance. How so? Foster smiled, but there was something calculating in her expression. Most documentation specialists are either fresh college graduates trying to build resumes, or burned-out bureaucrats counting days until retirement. You look like you could be modeling for magazines rather than documenting refugee conditions. I find that people are often more willing to speak with someone who doesn't look threatening, Sarah replied, using a response she'd developed during her operational years. Beauty can be an asset in humanitarian work, just like medical training or logistical expertise, I suppose. Just be aware that in our target area, your appearance might attract the wrong kind of attention from local security forces. Some of these tribal militias have very specific ideas about Western women. Sarah nodded, understanding the warning while knowing that Foster had no idea about her actual capabilities. I appreciate the concern. I've worked in challenging environments before. Foster led her through the airport toward the departure area where the relief convoy was being organized. The operation was larger than Sarah had expected, involving 3 vehicles loaded with medical supplies, food distribution materials, and equipment for establishing temporary treatment facilities in remote areas. Our route takes us through several checkpoints controlled by different groups, Foster explained as they walked. Some are government-affiliated, others are tribal militias. A few are basically organized bandits who figured out that controlling road access is profitable. The key is being patient, respectful, and absolutely transparent about our humanitarian mission. They reached the convoy staging area where other relief workers were conducting final equipment checks and vehicle preparations. Sarah counted 12 people total, including drivers who appeared to be local contractors hired specifically for their knowledge of regional conditions and checkpoint procedures. Team meeting in 5 minutes, Foster announced. Final briefing before departure. Sarah joined the circle of relief workers, noting their mix of experienced humanitarian professionals and younger volunteers who radiated enthusiasm tempered by nervous energy. Foster conducted the briefing with practiced efficiency, reviewing their route, timeline, security protocols, and emergency procedures. Our newest team member is Sarah Chen, documentation specialist, Foster said when introductions began. She'd be taking photographs and conducting interviews for donor reports and future mission planning. Sarah smiled and waved, playing the role of enthusiastic documentation specialist while conducting automatic threat assessments of everyone present. The other team members seemed genuine, their concerns focused on humanitarian effectiveness rather than operational security. But Sarah noticed one of the drivers, a man in his 30s with the alert posture of someone accustomed to violence, watching her with more than casual interest. Question about documentation protocols, said Jennifer Walsh, a nurse from Seattle who appeared to be on her first international relief mission. Are we supposed to get permission before photographing people? Some of the cultural briefing materials mention sensitivity about images. Good question, Foster replied. We always ask permission, and we're particularly careful about photographing women and children. Sarah, you'll need to be especially conscious of cultural sensitivities given your role. Absolutely, Sarah agreed. Respect for local customs is essential for building trust and ensuring continued access. The driver who'd been watching her stepped forward. Miss Chen, you have experience in this region? Some, Sarah replied carefully, though every area has unique challenges and considerations. Indeed, I am Hassan al-Mansuri. I provide security consultation for relief operations. May I ask what organization sponsored your previous work in the Middle East? Sarah felt the subtle probing, the kind of careful questioning that suggested Hassan knew more about regional security than his role as convoy driver would normally require. Various humanitarian organizations over the past several years, nothing as comprehensive as Hope International's mission. Hassan nodded, but his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her response. The route we travel tomorrow passes through territory controlled by groups that are particular about Western visitors, especially women who might be gathering intelligence rather than providing humanitarian assistance. Foster intervened before Sarah could respond. Hassan, Miss Chen has full security clearance for this mission. Her documentation work is completely legitimate and necessary for continued donor support. Of course, Hassan replied smoothly. I simply want to ensure that all team members understand the security environment we'll be operating in. Sarah recognized the subtle warning. Hassan suspected there was more to her presence than humanitarian documentation, and his question suggested he had enough regional experience to recognize operational personnel when he encountered them. The kind of complication that could compromise her mission before it truly began. But there was no turning back now. Torres, Kim, and Okafor were counting down the hours until they disappeared forever into a network of hidden facilities. Sarah would have to navigate Hassan's suspicions while maintaining her cover story and positioning herself for successful infiltration of the compound holding her. Fellow operators, the next 18 hours would determine whether she could overcome the obstacles already emerging, or whether her appearance and cover story would prove inadequate for the mission ahead. The convoy departed Djibouti at dawn, 3 vehicles loaded with supplies and personnel making their way toward the Yemeni border through terrain that shifted from coastal plains to mountainous desert with surprising abruptness. Sarah rode in the second vehicle, positioned between Foster and a young medical volunteer named Marcus, who spent the first hour asking enthusiastic questions about documentation procedures and donor requirements. Hassan drove the lead vehicle, his radio crackling periodically with updates from contacts along their route. Sarah could hear fragments of Arabic through the static, conversations about checkpoint conditions and security situations that suggested Hassan maintained a network of informants throughout the region. The kind of intelligence gathering that went far beyond normal convoy security. "First checkpoint coming up," Foster announced over the radio. "Everyone have your documentation ready." Sarah checked her papers one final time, noting the quality of the forged credentials that identified her as a documentation specialist with years of humanitarian experience. The documents would pass any reasonable inspection, but she remained alert for signs that Hassan or the checkpoint guards might probe deeper than routine verification. The checkpoint consisted of a concrete barrier across the road, flanked by guard positions that commanded clear fields of fire in both directions. 4 men in mismatched uniforms emerged from a small building, their weapons carried with the casual competence of people accustomed to violence. The leader approached Hassan's window while the others took positions that allowed them to observe all 3 vehicles simultaneously. Sarah watched the interaction through her side window, noting the respectful but cautious body language of both sides. Hassan presented documentation with practiced efficiency while maintaining eye contact and speaking in Arabic that was too rapid for Sarah to follow completely. The guard leader examined their papers while his subordinates conducted visual inspections of the vehicles and passengers. When the guard reached Sarah's window, his expression shifted slightly. Not suspicious exactly, but more interested than his routine inspection of other passengers had warranted. He spoke to Hassan in Arabic, gesturing towards Sarah while keeping his voice low enough that she couldn't make out specific words. Hassan's response was longer than necessary for simple identification verification. Sarah caught references to humanitarian work and documentation, but there were other phrases that suggested Hassan was providing additional context about her presence. The guard nodded and waved them through, but Sarah noticed him making notes in a small notebook after their convoy had passed. "Routine checkpoint," Foster said over the radio. "Good job, everyone." But Sarah had seen the guard's notebook, and she recognized the careful attention to detail that suggested information was being passed along to other security elements. Her description would be circulating through regional networks within hours, potentially compromising her ability to move unnoticed when she reached the target area. 20 kilometers beyond the first checkpoint, Hassan's radio crackled with an extended transmission in Arabic. Sarah listened carefully, picking up references to Western women and documentation specialists. When the transmission ended, Hassan pulled the convoy over for what he announced as a routine rest stop. "Miss Chen," Hassan approached her as she stepped out of the vehicle to stretch her legs. "I've received updated security information that may affect your documentation work." "What kind of information?" "There are reports of increased activity by groups that are hostile to Western humanitarian workers, specifically groups that believe documentation specialists may be gathering intelligence for military purposes." Sarah felt the familiar tension that came with operational complications. "Are you suggesting we abort the mission?" "Not necessarily, but I think it would be wise for you to understand exactly what you might be walking into." Hassan paused, studying her face with the calculating attention of someone making a critical assessment. Miss Chen, in your previous humanitarian work, did you ever encounter situations that required unconventional responses to security threats? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond routine convoy security. Sarah recognized the careful probing, the kind of indirect inquiry used to determine if someone possessed capabilities they weren't officially acknowledging. I'm not sure what you mean by unconventional responses. Hassan smiled, but his eyes remained serious. I mean the kind of responses that require training most humanitarian workers don't receive. The kind of training that might leave someone with particular skills and reflexes that are difficult to completely suppress. Foster approached before Sarah could respond, her medical bag slung over her shoulder and her expression focused on immediate concerns. Hassan, how much longer until we reach the next checkpoint? I'm concerned about the temperature affecting our medical supplies. 2 hours, perhaps 3 depending on road conditions, Hassan replied. Dr. Foster, may I speak with you privately? For a moment. They walked several meters away from the convoy, their conversation conducted in voices too low for Sarah to overhear. But she could see Hassan's gestures and Foster's body language, the kind of serious discussion that suggested concerns beyond routine logistics. Marcus, the young medical volunteer, appeared beside Sarah with a water bottle and the eager expression of someone trying to be helpful. Miss Chen, I've been thinking about your documentation work. How do you decide which stories to focus on? I mean, there must be so many difficult situations that choosing what to document would be overwhelming. You look for patterns, Sarah replied, grateful for the distraction from Hassan's scrutiny. Individual stories that represent larger systemic issues. People whose experiences illuminate the broader humanitarian challenges. That makes sense. Though I have to say, you seem really calm about heading into potentially dangerous territory. Most of the documentation people I've met seem more nervous about security situations. Sarah studied Marcus's earnest young face, noting the genuine curiosity mixed with something that might have been admiration. Experience teaches you to manage anxiety productively. Fear is useful if it keeps you alert, counterproductive if it prevents you from doing necessary work. Have you ever been in actual danger during documentation work? The question required careful navigation. Too much detail would compromise her cover, but complete evasion might raise more suspicions than honest acknowledgement of humanitarian work's inherent risks. Most humanitarian work involves some level of risk, Sarah said carefully. The key is preparation, situational awareness, and knowing when to trust your instincts about dangerous situations. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what I was hoping to learn from this mission. How to develop the kind of judgment that comes from experience. Hassan and Foster returned from their private conversation, both wearing expressions that suggested decisions had been made without input from other team members. Foster's demeanor toward Sarah had shifted subtly, becoming more protective than simply professional. Change of plans, Foster announced to the group. We're going to take a longer route to our destination, avoiding some areas where security conditions have deteriorated. What kind of deterioration? Asked Jennifer, the nurse from Seattle. Nothing that should affect our humanitarian mission, Hassan replied. But prudent security requires adapting to changing conditions. Sarah recognized the careful language of people managing information flow to prevent panic while acknowledging real threats. Whatever Hassan had learned from his radio contacts, it was significant enough to alter their planned route and increase security protocols. As they prepared to resume travel, Hassan approached Sarah one final time. Miss Chen, I want you to know that if circumstances require it, our security arrangements can be flexible, sometimes humanitarian. Missions encounter situations that demand rapid adaptation of roles and responsibilities. I appreciate your concern for team safety, Sarah replied, maintaining her cover while acknowledging the subtext of his words. Good, Because in my experience, the most dangerous situations are often resolved by people who have capabilities beyond what their official roles might suggest. Hassan returned to the lead vehicle, leaving Sarah with the clear understanding that her cover story was becoming increasingly transparent to someone whose regional knowledge and security experience allowed him to recognize discrepancies between appearance and capability. The convoy resumed its journey into increasingly mountainous terrain, carrying Sarah closer to her target, while the careful facade of humanitarian documentation specialists continued to unravel under the scrutiny of people who understood the difference between legitimate relief workers and something else entirely. Attack came without warning as their convoy negotiated a narrow mountain pass, where the road curved around massive boulders that had fallen from the cliffs above. Sarah was reviewing her target reconnaissance notes when the first gunshots shattered the afternoon quiet, bullets striking the road surface just ahead of Hassan's lead vehicle. "Contact front." Hassan's voice crackled over the radio with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to combat situations. "All vehicles stop. Take cover behind engine blocks." The convoy halted with practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't the first time these drivers had encountered hostile fire. Sarah watched team members scrambling from vehicles, their movements showing varying degrees of competence under stress. Foster moved with calm professionalism, immediately grabbing her medical bag and positioning herself to treat casualties. Marcus and Jennifer huddled behind the second vehicle, their faces showing the shocked confusion of people experiencing violence for the first time. "How many shooters?" Foster called out, her voice steady despite the continuing gunfire. "At least 4 positions," Hassan replied, peering around the front of his vehicle with a pair of binoculars. "Probably more. They have high ground advantage and clear fields of fire." Sarah conducted her own tactical assessment, noting muzzle flashes from positions that commanded the entire pass. The attackers had chosen their ambush point expertly, cutting off both forward movement and retreat while providing themselves with protected firing positions. Classic guerrilla tactics executed by people who understood mountain warfare. A sustained burst of automatic weapons fire raked across the road surface, forcing everyone to press closer to their vehicles. One round struck the windshield of the medical supply truck, spider webbing the safety glass and sending fragments across the cargo area. "Radio for assistance," Foster ordered. "Get word to authorities that we're under attack." Hassan was already working his radio, transmitting rapid Arabic that Sarah recognized as emergency protocols. But the response he received made his expression darken considerably. "No immediate assistance available," he announced. "Nearest security forces are engaged with other incidents. We're on our own until the situation stabilizes." Sarah felt the familiar shift in her thinking, the automatic transition from civilian mindset to operational analysis. The attackers weren't trying to kill them immediately. Otherwise, the initial volley would have targeted personnel rather than vehicles. This felt like a capture operation, designed to disable the convoy and take prisoners rather than simply eliminate threats. "Miss Chen, stay down," Foster called as another burst of gunfire struck near Sarah's position. But Sarah was already moving, not seeking cover, but positioning herself to better assess the tactical situation. She counted muzzle flashes, estimated ranges, and calculated angles of fire with the unconscious competence of someone who'd analyzed similar situations dozens of times before. "Hassan," she called out, surprising everyone by using a tone of command. Authority rather than civilian panic. "What's the escape route assessment?" Hassan turned toward her, his expression shifting as he registered something unexpected in her voice and posture. "Retreat is blocked by rockfall. Forward movement impossible due to direct fire. We're effectively trapped. Personnel weapons inventory?" The question hung in the air for a moment, its implications clear to anyone with tactical experience. Foster stared at Sarah with growing comprehension, while Marcus and Jennifer looked confused by the sudden change in her demeanor. "I have a sidearm," Hassan replied carefully. "Standard security protocol for convoy operations. Effective range and ammunition count?" Hassan studied Sarah's face, seeing something that made him reassess everything he thought he knew about the humanitarian documentation specialist. 40 meters maximum, 2 spare magazines. Not sufficient for sustained engagement against multiple hostiles in prepared positions. Another volley of gunfire struck the convoy, this time closer to personnel positions. One round ricocheted off the road surface and embedded itself in the tire of the supply truck, causing a slow deflation that would make vehicle movement impossible even if they could break contact. "They're advancing," Hassan observed, pointing toward movement among the rocks above their position, attempting to close distance for capture rather than elimination. Sarah made a decision that would irrevocably compromise her cover, but might save the lives of everyone in the convoy. She reached into her documentation bag, pushing aside cameras and notebooks to access equipment that had been carefully concealed beneath legitimate humanitarian supplies. Foster watched in amazement as Sarah assembled what was clearly a military-grade rifle from components that had been disguised as photography equipment. The transformation took less than 30 seconds, smooth and practiced motions that spoke of extensive training and recent familiarity with the weapon system. "Jesus Christ." Foster whispered, "Who are you?" Sarah didn't answer, focused entirely on tactical priorities. She extended the rifle's bipod and settled into a firing position that utilized the engine block of their vehicle for both cover and stability. Through the weapon's scope, she began identifying individual targets among the rocks above. "Hassan, I need you to create a distraction in 30 seconds, she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to commanding dangerous situations. "Draw their attention toward the lead vehicle." "What kind of distraction?" "Suppressive fire toward the eastern positions. Don't worry about accuracy, just make noise and movement." Hassan hesitated for only a moment before nodding acknowledgement. Whatever questions he had about Sarah's actual identity could wait until they survived the immediate situation. "On my mark," Sarah said, settling the rifle's stock against her shoulder and beginning her breathing sequence. Through the scope, she could see individual faces among the attackers, men with automatic weapons who clearly hadn't expected their humanitarian targets to possess military capabilities. "Mark!" Hassan opened fire toward the eastern positions, his pistol shots echoing off the canyon walls and immediately drawing return fire from multiple locations. The distraction worked exactly as Sarah had planned, focusing the attackers' attention away from her position and exposing them to accurate rifle fire. Sarah's first shot dropped the machine gunner who'd been providing sustained suppressive fire against the convoy. Her second shot eliminated the spotter who'd been directing target acquisition. The third shot disabled the radio operator, who'd been coordinating the attack from a protected position behind a large boulder. The remaining attackers realized they were facing capabilities far beyond what they'd expected from a humanitarian convoy, but their response came too late to matter. Sarah methodically engaged each visible target, her shots precise and efficient in a way that spoke of extensive combat experience. Within 2 minutes, the mountain pass was quiet except for the echo of her final shot reverberating off the canyon. Walls. Foster approached Sarah's position cautiously, staring at the woman who had just demonstrated marksmanship skills that went far beyond humanitarian documentation training. "The documentation specialist story was cover, wasn't it?" Foster said quietly. Sarah was already disassembling her rifle, returning the components to their concealed positions within her equipment bag. Some cover stories serve multiple purposes. Hassan walked over from his position, holstering his pistol and studying Sarah with the calculating attention of someone who recognized professional competence when he encountered it. "Military or intelligence?" he asked directly. "Does it matter? Right now?" Hassan smiled for the first time since the convoy had departed Djibouti. It matters because I've been wondering how someone was going to successfully infiltrate the compound holding your captured personnel. Now I understand why you're really here. Sarah felt her carefully constructed cover story crumble completely, but realized that might actually serve her mission better than continued deception. What gave it away? Beautiful women carrying documentation equipment rarely demonstrate expert marksmanship under combat stress. Hassan replied. Also, your tactical communication suggested training most humanitarian workers never receive. Foster was still processing the revelation, looking between Sarah and the neutralized ambush positions with growing comprehension. So the three captured operators everyone's been talking about on encrypted channels, Foster said slowly. You're here to extract them. Sarah met her gaze directly. Yes. And you thought you could accomplish that mission while maintaining cover as a documentation specialist. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The plan required adaptation, Sarah admitted. Hassan laughed, a sound that carried both admiration and relief. Miss Chen, or whatever your real name is, I think our humanitarian mission just became significantly more interesting. Hassan spent the next hour making radio calls in Arabic while the convoy regrouped from the ambush. Sarah watched him coordinate with contacts throughout the region, his conversations becoming increasingly animated as he explained their situation and requested assistance from what appeared to be an extensive network of informants and allies. Foster worked methodically to treat minor injuries sustained during the attack, her medical training taking precedence over her obvious questions about Sarah's real identity. Marcus and Jennifer remained quiet, still processing the violence they'd witnessed and the revelation that their documentation specialist was something entirely different from what she'd appeared to be. The compound you're targeting, Hassan. Saad, approaching Sarah as she conducted post-engagement equipment checks. I know the location. More importantly, I know the people running the operation. Sarah looked up from her rifle maintenance, noting the shift in Hassan's demeanor from suspicion to collaborative planning. What kind of people? Qasim al-Rashid controls that territory. Former military officer turned entrepreneur, specializing in high-value prisoner transfers. Very professional, very careful, and very aware that American Special Operations Forces have capabilities he needs to respect. Which means your captured personnel are alive and relatively well treated. But they won't remain in that compound much longer. Al-Rashid's standard procedure is 48 hours for initial interrogation, then transfer to permanent facilities in locations American intelligence will never find. Sarah calculated timing in her head, factoring in travel delays caused by the ambush and the time needed for infiltration planning. How long do we have? 18 hours, maybe 24 if weather delays the transfer convoy. After that, they disappear into a network of safe houses that extends from here to the Pakistani border. Hassan's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. He answered in rapid Arabic, his expression becoming more focused as he received what appeared to be updated intelligence about their target area. Good news and bad news, he announced after ending the call. Good news is that al-Rashid's security has been reduced due to other operational priorities. He's moved most of his personnel to handle a weapons shipment arriving tonight. Bad news? The reduced security is because he's accelerating the transfer timeline. Your people will be moved in approximately 12 hours, not 18. Sarah felt the familiar pressure of compressed operational windows, the kind of time constraints that force decisions between careful planning and immediate action. 12 hours was enough time for a hasty infiltration, but barely sufficient for the kind of detailed reconnaissance that maximized probability of success. What kind of assistance can you provide? Hassan smiled, an expression that transformed. his weathered face and suggested capabilities beyond convoy security. "Ms. Chen, my background includes more than driving relief supplies through dangerous territory. I spent 8 years with Jordanian Special Forces before transitioning to private security work." Foster overheard the conversation, her medical attention shifting towards Sarah and Hassan with growing understanding. "So neither of you are exactly what you appeared to be." "Dr. Foster," Sarah said carefully, "what you've witnessed today creates complications for everyone involved. If this becomes part of official reports—" "What official reports?" Foster interrupted. "As far as I'm concerned, our convoy was attacked by bandits, defended itself successfully, and continued its humanitarian mission. Documentation specialists sometimes have diverse skill sets, and security contractors occasionally demonstrate combat experience." Hassan nodded approvingly. "Dr. Foster understands operational discretion. The question is whether your mission can proceed with our support, or whether you need to separate from the convoy to avoid compromising our humanitarian cover." Foster continued. Sarah considered the options, weighing the advantages of continued humanitarian cover against the complications of involving civilian personnel in a military extraction operation. The original plan had called for her to slip away from the convoy during routine operations, infiltrate the compound independently, and extract the captured personnel without involving anyone else, but the ambush had changed circumstances significantly. Her cover was compromised, the timeline was compressed, and Hassan's offer of assistance provided capabilities that could dramatically improve her probability of success. "Hassan, what exactly are you proposing?" "Modified mission parameters. Instead of attempting solo infiltration, we conduct a coordinated extraction using combined humanitarian and security assets. Your expertise in special operations, my regional knowledge and contacts, Dr. Foster's medical capabilities for treating injured personnel." Foster raised an eyebrow. "You're assuming I'm willing to participate in a military operation disguised as humanitarian work." "I'm assuming you became a relief worker because you want to save lives," Hassan replied. 3 American soldiers are going to die or disappear unless someone helps them. That sounds like humanitarian work to me." Sarah studied both faces, recognizing the moment when operational planning either gained critical mass or collapsed under the weight of competing priorities. Foster's medical skills would be invaluable if the extracted personnel required immediate treatment. Hassan's regional expertise could provide intelligence and logistical support that would otherwise be unavailable, but involving civilians in a military operation violated every protocol she'd learned during her special operations training. "The risks are enormous," Sarah said honestly. "If we're captured, there's no official rescue coming. If the operation fails, everyone involved faces consequences that could include death or permanent imprisonment." "And if we don't try?" Foster asked. "What happens to the 3 people who are counting on someone caring enough to take those risks?" Hassan's radio buzzed with another incoming call. He answered tersely, his expression becoming increasingly serious as he received what appeared to be time-sensitive intelligence. "Decision time," he announced after ending the call. "My contacts report that the transfer convoy is being prepared ahead of schedule. We have 8 hours before your people are moved to a location where extraction becomes impossible." Sarah felt the familiar weight of command decisions, the moment when abstract planning collided with immediate reality and choices had to be made based on incomplete information and unacceptable alternatives. "What assets can you bring to the operation?" Hassan pulled out a detailed map of the target area, spreading it across the hood of their vehicle. "I have 4 reliable contacts within 10 kilometers of the compound. 2 with vehicles suitable for rapid extraction, 1 with communications equipment that can monitor security frequencies, 1 with detailed knowledge of guard rotations and defensive positions. Medical support?" Foster joined them at the map. her finger tracing potential extraction routes with the focused attention of someone making a commitment, despite significant reservations. "I can establish a forward aid station here," she said, pointing to a location that would be accessible by vehicle, but protected from direct observation. "Immediate trauma care, stabilization for transport, and emergency surgical capability if necessary." Sarah studied the map, her mind automatically calculating infiltration routes, extraction timelines, and contingency plans for various failure scenarios. The proposed operation was audacious, involving multiple moving parts and personnel who lacked the specialized training typically required for such missions, but it was also their only realistic chance of extracting Torres, Kim, and Okafor before they disappeared into a network of facilities that American intelligence had been trying to penetrate unsuccessfully for years. "Hassan, your contacts understand the risks? They understand that American soldiers need help, and they remember when American soldiers helped them. Sometimes that's enough." Sarah looked at the faces surrounding the map, seeing determination, mixed with fear in appropriate proportions for people who understood exactly what they were volunteering for. "Dr. Foster, I need absolute honesty. Are you prepared for the possibility that this operation will involve violence? That people may be killed, that you may witness things that will affect you for the rest of your life?" Foster met her gaze directly. "I became a doctor to save lives. If that requires accepting some of those risks, then I accept them." Sarah made her decision with the cold calculation that had served her during years of special operations, balancing probability of success against consequences of failure and accepting that some choices had to be made regardless of personal preference. 8 hours to infiltration. "Hassan, contact your people and begin coordination. Dr. Foster, prepare medical supplies for trauma treatment and rapid evacuation. Everyone else maintains humanitarian cover until we reach the staging area." As the convoy prepared to resume movement toward their target, Sarah felt the familiar transformation from planning to execution, the moment when abstract preparation became concrete action with irreversible consequences. Torres, Kim, and Okafor were counting down their final hours of captivity, unaware that their extraction now depended on an improvised team of humanitarian workers and regional contacts, whose only common qualification was the willingness to risk everything for people they'd never met. The staging area was abandoned. Livestock station 3 kilometers from Al-Rashid's compound, hidden in a valley that provided concealment from aerial observation, while maintaining radio contact with Hassan's network of informants. Sarah studied the compound through high-powered binoculars, noting guard positions and patrol patterns with the systematic attention to detail that had kept her alive during previous operations. "Security rotation every 40 minutes, Hassan reported, monitoring radio traffic through equipment his contacts had provided. Currently 6 guards on perimeter duty, plus an unknown number inside the main building." Foster was establishing her forward aid station in the ruins of the livestock facility, arranging medical supplies with the efficient organization of someone preparing for mass casualty treatment. Her hands moved with steady competence despite the obvious stress of participating in her first military operation. "Prisoner location confirmed?" Sarah asked, adjusting the binoculars to examine the compound's central building. "Eastern wing, 2nd floor," Hassan replied, consulting notes from his latest intelligence update. 3 Americans being held in separate rooms, guard posted outside each door. Transfer convoy scheduled to arrive in 4 hours. Sarah lowered the binoculars and turned to face the small team that would determine whether 3 American operators lived or died. Hassan's contacts had proven reliable, providing real-time intelligence and logistical support that transformed an impossible solo mission into something approaching feasible. "Infiltration plan," she announced, spreading her tactical map across a makeshift table. "Single operator insertion through the northern perimeter where guard coverage is weakest. Neutralize interior security. Extract all 3 personnel. Rally at the aid station for medical assessment before final evacuation. Hassan pointed to a section of the compound's wall. This drainage culvert provides concealed approach to within 50 meters of the target building. My contacts report it's unguarded during evening prayer, which begins in 90 minutes. Timeline for extraction? Prayer lasts 20 minutes. Add 10 minutes for security reset. That gives you 30 minutes. Maximum inside the compound before patrol schedules resume normal rotation. Sarah studied the compound layout, calculating movement times and identifying potential bottlenecks that could trap her inside if the operation took longer than anticipated. 30 minutes was tight, but manageable if everything proceeded according to plan. Medical status of the prisoners. Foster consulted her notes from Hassan's intelligence reports. Torres has sustained injuries from initial capture, but remains ambulatory. Kim appears uninjured, but may be experiencing psychological stress from interrogation. Okafor has possible internal injuries that could complicate rapid movement. Sarah absorbed this information, adjusting her extraction plan to account for potentially injured personnel who might require assistance during the escape phase. 3 operators in unknown physical condition, moving through hostile territory under time pressure, with limited backup if things went wrong. Hassan, your people understand that once this begins, there's no turning back? They understand. American. Special operations personnel saved the life of my contact's brother during operations against ISIS. Some debts transcend nationality and politics. Sarah began her equipment check, examining each piece of gear that would determine the success or failure of the next hour. Her rifle was zeroed for the expected engagement ranges. Her medical kit contained supplies for treating gunshot wounds and trauma injuries. Her communications equipment was programmed, with frequencies that would allow coordination with Hassan's team. Foster approached as Sarah completed her preparations. "I've never been involved in anything like this," she said quietly. "Are you sure we can get them out?" Sarah looked at the woman who had committed to risking her life for people she'd never met, whose medical skills might mean the difference between successful extraction and watching wounded operators die from injuries that could have been treated. "Dr. Foster, I've conducted 17 extractions during my operational career. 14 were successful. The 3 that failed taught me everything I needed to know about what can go wrong when you don't prepare for every contingency." "What went wrong with the 3 that failed?" "Insufficient intelligence, compressed timelines, and overconfidence in my ability to overcome superior numbers through individual skill," Sarah replied honestly. "This mission has better intelligence than most, but the timeline is still compressed. And we're still outnumbered." Foster nodded, understanding the honest assessment of their chances. "What makes you think this one will be different?" Sarah checked her rifle one final time, ensuring that every system was functioning properly. "Because this time I'm not operating alone. Hassan's intelligence network provides capabilities I've never had before, and your medical expertise means injured personnel won't die from treatable conditions during evacuation." Hassan's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. He answered tersely, his expression becoming more focused as he received what appeared to be time-sensitive information. "Change in guard rotation," he announced. "They're moving to enhanced security 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Someone may have reported our presence in the area." Sarah felt the familiar compression of operational timelines, the moment when careful planning collided with changing circumstances and decisions had to be made based on incomplete information. Window for infiltration? 12 minutes until evening prayer begins. After that, security posture increases significantly and the drainage approach becomes covered by additional sentries. 12 minutes to cover 3 kilometers of rough terrain, penetrate a defended compound, locate and extract 3 prisoners, and escape before enhanced security protocols made retreat impossible. Sarah shouldered her rifle and checked her equipment. One final time. Hassan, maintain radio contact and be prepared for immediate evacuation when we reach the rally point. Dr. Foster, have trauma supplies ready for multiple casualties. What if something goes wrong? Foster asked. Sarah moved toward the concealed approach route, her mind already transitioning from planning to execution mode. Then you document what happened and make sure someone knows 3 American operators died because people cared enough to try. The drainage culvert was exactly where Hassan's intelligence had indicated, providing concealed movement through terrain that would have been impassable under direct observation. Sarah moved with the smooth efficiency of someone who had infiltrated similar compounds dozens of times, every step calculated to minimize noise and avoid triggering defensive responses. As she approached the compound's perimeter, Sarah could hear the evening call to prayer beginning in the distance, the familiar sound that would provide crucial minutes of distraction while guards focused on religious obligations rather than security procedures. 3 American operators were counting down their final hours of captivity, unaware that their extraction now depended on a woman who had once been dismissed as too beautiful for combat operations, but had learned to transform those assumptions into lethal advantages. The compound's northern wall was lower than the intelligence our EPORTS had indicated, constructed from local stone that provided handholds for someone with appropriate climbing experience. Sarah scaled the barrier during the 3rd verse of evening prayer, when the guard's attention was focused on religious observance rather than perimeter security. She dropped silently into a courtyard filled with maintenance equipment and storage containers, immediately seeking cover behind a diesel generator that would mask any sound of her movement. Through gaps in the equipment, she could observe the main building where Torres, Kim, and Okafor were being held. 2 guards remained on duty during prayer time, positioned at the building's main entrance with automatic rifles slung casually across their shoulders. Their posture suggested routine boredom rather than heightened alertness, exactly the kind of complacency that made infiltration possible. Sarah moved between storage containers with practiced stealth, closing the distance to the building while remaining invisible to the guards. Her route took her through shadows created by external lighting that was positioned for general illumination rather than security purposes. The first guard was smoking a cigarette near the entrance, his attention focused on something happening in the distance rather than immediate surroundings. Sarah approached from his blind spot, moving with the fluid grace that had made her legendary among special operations personnel. When she stepped into his peripheral vision, the guard's first reaction was confusion rather than alarm. He saw an attractive woman in civilian clothes, someone who clearly didn't belong in a military compound, but didn't immediately register as a threat. "Excuse me," Sarah said in accented Arabic, allowing a slight tremor to enter her voice. "I think I'm lost. My vehicle broke down and I was looking for help." The guard's automatic rifle remained slung across his shoulder as he turned to face her fully, his expression shifting from boredom to interest as he registered her appearance. Sarah had learned during her operational years that men consistently underestimated beautiful women, especially when those women appeared vulnerable and in need of assistance. "How did you get inside the compound?" the guard asked, stepping closer to her with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with security protocols. "There was an opening in the wall," Sarah replied, moving closer herself while maintaining the helpless demeanor that kept his weapon out of ready position. "I was frightened and looking for someone who could help me." The guard reached for his radio to report the security breach, but Sarah moved faster than his training had prepared him to expect. Her hand closed over his throat with precise pressure that collapsed his windpipe before he could make a sound, while her other hand prevented his rifle from coming into firing position. He dropped unconsciously to the ground within seconds, eliminated without triggering any alarm that would alert other security personnel to her presence. The second guard was positioned near the building's side entrance, separated from his partner by 30 meters of open courtyard. Sarah approached his position using a different strategy. Relying on misdirection rather than close-quarters elimination, she deliberately created a small noise near the main entrance, drawing his attention away from her actual approach vector. When he moved to investigate, she slipped through the side entrance and into the building's interior. The hallway was dimly lit and smelled of diesel fuel and unwashed humanity, exactly what she'd expected from a temporary detention facility operated by people whose priorities focused on function rather than comfort. Sarah moved toward the stairs leading to the second floor where the prisoners were reportedly being held. Her soft-soled boots made no sound on the concrete steps as she ascended toward the detention area. At the top of the stairs, she could hear voices speaking Arabic, guards discussing something that involved periodic laughter and casual conversation. 3 guards were positioned in the hallway outside the detention rooms, exactly as Hassan's intelligence had indicated. Their weapons were readily accessible, but not in immediate firing position, suggesting they viewed prison guard duty as routine rather than dangerous. Sarah assessed the tactical situation, calculating angles of engagement and identifying the sequence of actions that would neutralize all 3 guards. Before any could raise an alarm or threaten the prisoners, the first guard was positioned nearest to the stairwell, leaning against the wall while participating in conversation with his colleagues. Sarah approached him with the same combination of apparent vulnerability and lethal capability that had worked in the courtyard. "Please help me," she said in Arabic, stepping into the hallway with her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I was captured by your men downstairs, but I escaped and I'm trying to find a way out." All 3 guards turned toward her, their expressions showing the same combination of confusion and interest that she'd exploited successfully throughout her operational career. They saw a beautiful woman in distress, someone who clearly needed protection rather than representing any kind of threat. The nearest guard stepped forward to take custody of her, his rifle remaining slung while he reached for restraints that would secure what appeared to be an escaped prisoner. His mistake was fatal. Sarah's movement was economical and devastatingly effective. She eliminated the first guard with a neck strike that severed his spinal cord, took possession of his rifle, and engaged the remaining 2 guards before they could process what was happening. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds, concluded before any of the guards could activate alarms or alert additional security personnel to her presence. Sarah immediately moved to the first detention room, using keys taken from the eliminated guards to unlock the heavy door. Inside, she found Staff Sergeant Michael Kim, who looked up from his position on a concrete bench with an expression of shocked disbelief. "Kim, I'm here for extraction," she said quietly. "Can you move?" Kim stared at her for a moment, clearly struggling to process the appearance of a woman who looked like she belonged in fashion magazines, rather than conducting combat operations in Yemeni compounds. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Someone who keeps promises," Sarah replied, already moving toward the next detention room where Torres and Okafor were waiting for rescue that had finally arrived. Torres was in the second room, her face bearing the marks of interrogation, but her eyes alert and focused when Sarah opened the door. The captain's military bearing remained intact despite her circumstances, and she immediately recognized Sarah as friendly forces rather than additional captors. "Extraction team?" Torres asked, rising from her position on the floor with movements that suggested painful but not debilitating injuries. "Single operator," Sarah replied, handing Torres a sidearm taken from one of the eliminated guards. "Can you provide covering fire if necessary?" Torres checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through safety checks with the automatic competence of someone who'd handled firearms in combat situations for years. "Roger that. What's our exfil route?" "Northern drainage. Rally point 3 kilometers south. We have medical support and transportation standing by." The third room contained Sergeant First Class David Okafor, who was in worse condition than his colleagues. He was conscious but favoring his left side in a way that suggested internal injuries from his initial capture. When Sarah opened his door, Okafor looked up with the careful wariness of someone who'd been expecting additional interrogation rather than rescue. "Okafor, I'm here to get you out," Sarah said, immediately assessing his physical condition and calculating how his injuries might affect their extraction timeline. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I can move at full speed," Okafor admitted, his honesty reflecting the professional responsibility of someone who understood that his limitations could compromise the entire operation. "We'll adapt," Sarah replied, helping him to his feet and noting the way he protected his ribs. "Kim, take point. Torres, rear security. I'll assist Okafor." They moved toward the stairwell with the coordinated efficiency of people trained for exactly this type of situation. But Sarah could hear sounds from the courtyard that suggested their presence had been discovered. Radio chatter in Arabic, vehicle engines starting, the distinctive sound of weapons being readied for combat. "Compromise," Sarah announced quietly. "Security response is mobilizing faster than anticipated." Through a window overlooking the courtyard, she could see guards emerging from other buildings, their movements showing the focused urgency of people responding to a confirmed security breach. The evening prayer had ended, and the compound was returning to full operational status at the worst possible moment. "How many?" Torres asked, positioning herself to provide covering fire down the hallway they'd just traversed. "At least 8. Visible. Probably more coming," Sarah replied, helping Okafor navigate the stairs while Kim cleared the path ahead. "Original extraction route is compromised." Kim reached the bottom of the stairs and immediately signaled for halt, indicating hostile movement near their planned exit route. Through the building's windows, Sarah could see guards establishing positions that would make their original escape impossible. "Alternative routes?" Torres asked. Sarah's mind raced through the compound layout, calculating distances and obstacles while factoring in Okafor's reduced mobility and the increasing number of hostiles converging on their position. The drainage culvert that had provided concealed insertion was now covered by guards, who understood exactly how she'd gained access. Eastern wall, she decided. Longer approach but less likely to be covered by response forces. Kim moved toward the eastern exit with the point man discipline that had made him valuable to special operations units. But Sarah's radio crackled with Hassan's voice carrying urgent warning. "Phoenix, be advised transfer convoy arriving ahead of schedule. Multiple vehicles approaching compound from eastern approach." Sarah felt the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly, their window for extraction closing as both internal security and external reinforcements converged on the compound. The transfer convoy would bring additional personnel specifically trained for handling high-value prisoners, along with equipment designed to prevent exactly the kind of rescue operation they were attempting. "Time to convoy arrival," Sarah transmitted. 8 minutes maximum, Hassan replied. "Recommend immediate extraction through western perimeter." But the western perimeter required crossing open ground that would expose them to direct fire from multiple guard positions. With Okafor's injuries limiting their movement speed, attempting that route would likely result in casualties they couldn't afford. Sarah made a command decision that violated every principle of small unit tactics but addressed the reality of their deteriorating situation. Instead of attempting stealth extraction, she would create sufficient chaos to mask their escape while drawing hostile attention away from their actual route. "Kim, Torres, get Okafor to the western wall and wait for my signal," she ordered. "I'm going to create a distraction that will give you opportunity for movement." Torres understood immediately. "Negative. We don't leave team members behind." "You're not leaving me behind," Sarah replied, already moving toward the compound's fuel storage area she'd observed during infiltration. "I'm buying you time to complete the mission." Kim took custody of Okafor while Torres established overwatch position, both operators recognizing the tactical logic even as they instinctively resisted abandoning their rescuer to face superior numbers alone. Sarah reached the fuel storage area as the first. Elements of the transfer convoy became visible through the compound's main gate. Multiple vehicles carrying personnel whose specific training focused on preventing prisoner escapes and eliminating rescue attempts. She placed explosive charges from her equipment kit against fuel storage tanks, setting timed detonators that would create maximum chaos while providing her with escape opportunity. The resulting explosion would destroy the compound's power generation and create confusion that might allow all four of them to reach the extraction point. But as Sarah prepared to trigger the diversion, her radio crackled with transmission that changed everything about their tactical situation. "Phoenix, this is Control." Rivera's voice cut through the static. "Abort extraction immediately. Compound is under surveillance by hostile intelligence assets. Your operation has been compromised at the highest levels." Sarah realized their rescue mission had become something much more dangerous than simple prisoner extraction. Someone with access to operational intelligence had betrayed their presence, turning their humanitarian cover into a trap that threatened not just their lives, but the entire network of people who'd helped make the mission possible. Sarah ignored Rivera's abort order and triggered the explosive charges, sending flames and debris across the compound as fuel storage tanks erupted in sequence. The detonations created exactly the chaos she'd calculated, destroying power systems and forcing guards to choose between fighting fires and pursuing escaping prisoners. In the confusion that followed, Kim and Torres moved Okafor across the western perimeter while Sarah provided covering fire from positions that kept hostile forces focused on her location rather than the actual extraction route. Her rifle shots were precise and devastating, eliminating threats with the methodical efficiency that had earned her reputation among special operations personnel. But as she moved toward the rally point, Sarah's radio crackled with transmissions that confirmed Rivera's warning. Hostile intelligence assets were coordinating response efforts with professional competence that suggested advanced knowledge of their operational plans. "Hassan, be advised we have a leak in operational security." Sarah transmitted while engaging guards who were attempting to cut off her escape route. "Someone with high-level access has compromised our mission." Hassan's response carried the grim understanding of someone who'd operated in regions where betrayal meant death for everyone involved. "Copy that. My contacts are reporting unusual coordination between local security forces and outside intelligence assets." Sarah reached the drainage culvert as additional vehicles arrived at the compound, their occupants moving with the focused urgency of people executing predetermined plans rather than responding to unexpected emergencies. Someone had known exactly when and how the rescue would be attempted. The extraction route took her through terrain that should have been unguarded, but Sarah encountered prepared positions that suggested hostile forces had advanced intelligence about her planned escape path. She was forced to engage multiple enemies while moving toward the rally point, where Foster was providing medical treatment to the extracted operators. "Phoenix, status report." Foster's voice carried medical authority as she worked on Okafor's injuries while monitoring radio traffic. "En route to rally point. Multiple hostiles in pursuit," Sarah replied, eliminating 2 guards who'd attempted to establish blocking positions along her route. "Prepare for immediate evacuation upon my arrival." But when Sarah reached the aid station, she found Hassan engaged in heated radio conversation with contacts who were reporting disturbing developments throughout the region. The compromise of their operation had triggered security responses that extended far beyond the immediate compound. "Sarah, we have a serious problem," Hassan announced as she arrived. "Intelligence assets are rolling up the entire network that supported this operation. My contacts are being arrested or eliminated by people who knew exactly who to target." Foster looked up from her treatment of Okafor, whose internal injuries were more serious than initial assessment had indicated. He needs immediate surgical intervention. We can't delay evacuation much longer. Sarah studied the faces surrounding her, recognizing the moment when operational success collided with strategic disaster. They'd successfully extracted Torres, Kim, and Okafor, but the cost was destruction of Hassan's intelligence network and potential exposure of everyone who'd participated in the mission. Hassan, how many of your people are at risk? All of them. 12 contacts across 3 provinces, plus their families. Someone provided hostile intelligence with complete operational details, including names, locations, and communication protocols. Torres, despite her own injuries, was monitoring their tactical situation with the professional focus of someone trained for exactly these circumstances. Sarah, we need to make a choice. Continue evacuation and accept that supporting personnel will face consequences, or attempt to warn the network and risk losing everyone. The decision required balancing immediate tactical priorities against longer-term strategic obligations, weighing the lives of 3 extracted operators against dozens of local assets who'd risked everything to support American personnel. Sarah made the choice that defined her character and honored the promises that transcended official authorization. Hassan, contact everyone in your network immediately. Warning takes priority over our evacuation security. For the next hour, Hassan transmitted warnings while Sarah and Torres established defensive positions around the aid station. Foster continued, treating Okafor while preparing medical supplies for rapid movement. Once the warning process was complete, the radio traffic revealed the extent of the betrayal, with hostile forces demonstrating knowledge that could only have come from someone with access to classified operational details. But Hassan's warnings allowed most of his contacts to escape arrest, preserving relationships that had taken years to develop. When the evacuation helicopter finally arrived, it carried 4 American operators whose extraction had been successful. Despite betrayal at the highest levels of operational planning, Sarah looked back at the burning compound in the distance, knowing that her mission had saved 3 lives while exposing vulnerabilities in the intelligence systems that supported similar operations. During the flight back to safe territory, Rivera's voice crackled over secure communications with updates that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The operational compromise had been deliberate, orchestrated by someone within the intelligence community who'd attempted to use the rescue mission as bait for eliminating regional assets. Phoenix, investigation is ongoing regarding the source of the compromise, Rivera transmitted. But the extraction was successful, and all personnel are accounted for. Sarah removed her headset and looked at Torres, Kim, and Okafor, who were receiving medical attention while processing their own survival. 3 American operators were going home to families who'd been waiting for news about loved ones, deployed to missions that officially didn't exist. Foster approached as the helicopter carried them toward debriefing and medical treatment that would transition them back to official channels. Sarah, what you did back there, the choices you made about warning Hassan's network, that wasn't standard operational procedure. No, Sarah agreed. But some things matter more than procedure. The woman who'd been dismissed as too beautiful for special operations had just completed one of the most successful extractions in recent memory, proving once again that appearances could be deceiving and that the deadliest operators sometimes looked nothing like what people expected. But as the helicopter disappeared into the night sky, Sarah knew this really was her final mission. The promise she'd made to herself about retirement would finally be honored, her obligations to fallen comrades satisfied through one last demonstration that some commitments transcended official authorization and personal safety. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen stood before her advanced calculus class, explaining derivatives to students who had no idea their professor had once been the military's most lethal operator. The academic routine had resumed, but something fundamental had changed. Torres, Kim, and Okafor had returned to their families, their rescue officially attributed to routine intelligence operations. Hassan's network had survived the betrayal, strengthened by the loyalty demonstrated during their darkest hour. The investigation into the operational compromise had quietly disappeared into classified files that would never see public scrutiny. But every morning when Sarah looked in the mirror, she saw someone who'd kept every promise that mattered. Woman they'd called too pretty for special forces had become exactly what she needed to be when it counted most. Her secure phone had been permanently disabled, her operational equipment destroyed, her ties to the shadow world officially severed. Sarah Chen was finally completely just a mathematics professor whose biggest concern was whether her students understood calculus. Sometimes the most important victories happened in silence, won by people whose names would never appear in headlines, but whose actions made all the difference to those who mattered most. If this story of hidden strength and unbreakable promises inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of everyday heroes. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Your support helps us share more incredible stories of people who prove that appearances can be deceiving and courage comes in unexpected forms. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest inspirational content.